I had already purchased the Bhagavad Gita in Washington, D.C. and had been reading it. And then, I can't remember, sometime in 1972, I moved to Cape Cod. I was living on Manatee Beach in Cape Cod. And at some point after reading the Bhagavad Gita, I decided that I should visit the temple, because I had already read Bhagavad Gita and I had read Krishna book. And I had a copy of the first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam, that both the Krishna book and the Bhagavatam I got through BBT mail order. So on my first attempt to drive to Boston to find the temple, I thought it was on Beacon Street. So I was driving up and down Beacon Street, looking for 40 Beacon Street, and I couldn't find the temple. So I drove back to the Cape, and I didn't find it. Somehow I thought it was Boston. And then I found out afterwards it was in Alston, and it was another street. So on the second attempt to come to the temple, I drove up to, found after some time 40 North Beacon Street in Alston, and I parked the car in front of the temple. And I remember, because I had already read those books quite adequately, and I was thinking deeply for some time about going into the temple. And I remember at one point realizing that if I went into the temple, I might never come out. So I turned around and drove back to Cape Cod again. So on the third attempt, I drove to exactly, I knew where to go. And then I got up enough courage to go and knock on the door in North Beacon Street. And the devotee first devotee to meet me, he was a bhakta at the time. His name was Bhakti Gary, although he was later initiated as Krishnarchana. But he smiled, welcomed me in, and it was like, as soon as I saw the smile on his face, I was thinking, I think I made the wise choice to come in this time. And I was brought into the temple, and the first devotee to speak with me was Shubhananda Das. And Shubhananda sat down and talked with me, answering all my questions for hours. For hours, maybe at least 3 hours. And he gave me my first set of japa beads. And then, after some time with him, I returned back to the Cape. And he showed me how to chant japa, and I started chanting japa regularly. So, of course, that was my first time in the temple, and then I started to come regularly. And I started to get to know some of the devotees in the temple, but I was fortunate. I remember coming to the temple, and there was a devotee, my godbrother, whose name was Keshava, who was living in the temple. And Keshava had come from San Francisco to spend a little time with Trey Das, who was the president at that time, who was also from San Francisco. And at the time, I didn't know why he was there, but later learned that he came there to help Trey, because Trey was formerly from San Francisco, and Keshava came there. And Keshava was a very, very outgoing, very personal. And he sort of like took me under his wing every time I visited. Keshava was like always the person to receive me and talk with me, tell me stories. And the one thing that I remember about Keshava more than anything is that I considered him because he told stories about Prabhupada, he associated with Prabhupada. And his brother was Kurandar, who was like Prabhupada's, at one time, Kurandar was considered to be like the most powerful person in the movement. Like Prabhupada was really, I don't know if it was right at that time in 72, but in early 73, but it could have been. But Keshava was, he was sort of like, would always just be my friend, never be authoritative with me, and never spoke to me in any kind of a condescending way as if like he was better than me. And although I was thinking myself, you know, I was a long-haired hippie, and my lifestyle was not necessarily anywhere close to devotional. But that kind of friendly dealing with me really, really had a deep impact on me. So, and he was probably the most instrumental for me to come and to actually to decide to join the temple. But the way it happened was that Keshava, while I was visiting the temple, at one point he decided he was going to move on. He told me he was going to go open up some preaching in Guyana. And he used to tell me, he said, "You're the type of person that will be a preacher." He said, "I can tell." And he said, "Why don't you come and join me when you decide to become a devotee and move into the temple? Come and join me in Guyana, and you and I will preach together." So I always remembered that. And the fact that he invited me to do that, and because I had an attraction for traveling and adventuresome spirit, and that I decided that it was in 1973, I actually joined in New Vrindavan first before Boston, at Keshava's request. And the reason why, you know, to put this on, is because I had a dog, and Keshava knew how attached I was to the dog. So Keshava said, "Why don't you join in New Vrindavan and you can keep your dog?" So rather than trying to get me to stay in Boston, he tried and encouraged me to go to New Vrindavan and join there. So there's a whole story behind that also. I didn't stay in New Vrindavan that long. I think I was only there for 2 weeks. And then I came back to Boston again. And then when I finally decided to move into the temple, Keshava had already departed and left in what I understood was Guyana to go and preach. And he had told me, he said, "Whenever you come and you'll get your robes, get your shaved heads, and then come and join me in Guyana and we'll preach together." So when I finally got up the courage to come to the Boston temple and to move into the temple, I came to the temple and I told them I wanted to stay. And at that time, the temple leadership was sort of like testing people who wanted to, whether or not they were serious about staying in the temple or not. So they said, "Well, before you can move into the temple, you have to sleep down in the basement." And the basement was just like a cold, uneven concrete floor. And I was told to go down there, stay with one other person who was also coming to the temple at that time. And I stayed there for a couple of weeks, and I didn't tell him the reason why I was joining the temple to go join Keshava, because Keshava told me, "Wait until you're shaved up and you have your robes." So I didn't have those requirements fulfilled yet. So finally, after some time, they ascertained that I was serious enough, and Srinath shaved me up. There were no such things as buzzers in those days. And it took Srinath a few hours to get all the hair off my head. And then I got a dhoti, and then I told him, I said that Keshava told me that once I'm shaved up and I'm wearing a dhoti, that he wants me to join him in Guyana. And they told me, "You're not going anywhere." I said, "Well, the Keshava's waiting for me." And they said, "No, you're going to stay here." And they took everything away from me to make sure I wasn't going anywhere. And then trade house, yeah. I think Adi Keshava must have been involved also. Yeah, I somehow I suspect. I never asked Trey, you know. Srinath was definitely involved also. Definitely Srinath was involved. Srinath became like my friend while I was living in the temple. He was like, yeah, he was always, any problem at all would arise in the temple, I would always go see Srinath. You know, he's like my big brother. But anyway, so I don't want to get too much into about myself, but I remember the temple atmosphere in the beginning, especially coming to the temple. And it was in Boston, it was really a family spirit. I mean, that's what I remember most about the temple. I mean, in those days, it was like, you just did what you're told to do and you were happy doing it. And everybody just, you know, would struggle together. Everything was, and we were struggling. I mean, financially, temple was having great difficulties financially. I remember when I first moved in that first winter, we didn't have any heat. And the temple president, Draper Prabhu, bought everybody these snorkel coats. Was that in 73, wasn't it? I think it was in 73, winter of 73. These coats, for $20 each. They weren't really warm coats, but, and those became like our 24-hour a day. We would sleep in them and we would wear them in the out in Sankirtan. And you know, I remember going into the bathroom and there was a hole in the window and the snow was coming in. There was ice on the floor, and it was quite cold, austere. But although it was cold and austere, you know, everybody just embraced the opportunity to, you know, to do whatever was necessary to keep the temple going and as Jayadvaita Maharaj mentioned, you know, Boston was known for its amazing Sunday feasts. There was a devotee here named Mathuresh, who was the cook at that time. He joined before me. He joined in 1971, and he was the cook, and he would make these fantastic feasts, you know, with sabjis and sweet rice and halava and nectar drinks, and we lived from one Sunday feast to the next, and in those days, we hadn't really started so much book distribution yet, although December of 73 was the first marathon, or maybe it was the second, but we did a marathon in that month. But prior to that, we used to just go out and do Harinam. Sometimes just small groups of us, sometimes just Mathuresh and myself would go out to Harvard Square, and we'd stand in front of the bank next to the Harvard Coop and just chant on Harinam for a few hours, then go back to the temple. And then, but I can't remember how many devotees were living in the temple at that time. I'd say maybe 12. But the family atmosphere was just so attractive to me that that's what really attracted me to come to the temple. Of course, Keshava was very attractive to me, but the atmosphere in the temple was always just like the spiritual world. And even upon moving into the temple, although I had some difficulties that I had to confront in my early days in the temple, but they could always be overcome by association with those few devotees and friends who would always comfort me and help me. Primarily, which was at that time after Keshava had left, which was Tredas, who was the temple president, and Srinath. Srinath was like he was everybody's friend. Srinath had tuberculosis, actually, and he was very limited as what he could do. So he was always in the temple. He couldn't really go out, didn't have much strength, and because he was quite sickly, he found the kind of service that, was always looking for the kind of service he could do that wouldn't waste his body. But one of the things he always did very nicely, he was like the big brother of everybody. And having a big brother was really for me was very, very comforting. In 1974, we moved to Commonwealth Avenue because I was very instrumental for that move, because I can't remember the main reason why we moved. I think we were having a difficult time paying the mortgage, was it, or something like that? No? No?
This was way more than that.
I don't remember. There was a reason. There was a reason why we had to move out of that building. No. No. I don't remember. I don't remember. I guess the person that would know is Trey Us, but who's another great person to interview. But Trey. But somehow or other, we purchased this building on Commonwealth Avenue, and we put down a down payment. And the amount that we paid for this building was like, I think it was about $125,000. Huh?
That seems really cheap.
Yeah, no, that's what it was. That's what it was. Yeah. That's what it was. It wasn't much more than that.
Probably the best investment ISKCON ever made.
Yeah, that's all we paid for this building. This was not a very fancy neighborhood when we purchased it in 1974. Not at all. It had no prestige in Back Bay, believe me. You know, you weren't here, you were always out on the road. But it wasn't a very prestigious area when we purchased this building. It definitely was between $100,000 and $200,000 that we paid, and I believe it was $125,000.
Wasn't this paid by Ford?
No, Ambarish Prabhu, he helped build the altar in 1976. Ambarish had nothing to do with it. He was supposed to have a restaurant on Newbury Street. Prabhupada sent him here to open a restaurant on Newbury Street. And during that time, Aja was the president. And Aja asked Ambarish if he would help finish the altar because Prabhupada was going to come. And Prabhupada had on his itinerary, Boston was one of the places he wanted to visit, because when he saw a picture of the Boston temple, Prabhupada says, yes, I want to go there. Yes, this one. And Prabhupada had it on his itinerary to come here. And the reason why I know all these details is because I was the only carpenter in the temple. And I was distributing books at that time. And Aja was trying to convince me to fix Prabhupada's rooms for him, that he was coming. And I was telling the Prabhupada would probably want me to distribute books. He wouldn't want me to fix his room. And I was really resisting. He said, and he walked into the room, he looked at me, he said, would you let your spiritual master stay in these rooms? And I had to surrender. So I stayed off book distribution for several months at that time to fix up the front rooms for Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada got called to India to meet Indira Gandhi instead, and he had to cut off a few temples from his itinerary, and he never made it to Boston. So that's how I know that, anyways, about Ambarish, Prabhupada had sent him here in '76, and I happened to be back fixing up the temple at that time, when Prabhupada had sent Ambarish to open the temple with Shrutikirti and another devotee named Gaur Govinda. Not Gaur Govinda Maharaj, but it was another devotee whose name was Gaur Govinda. And the three of them were here. But then Ambarish had second thoughts and had written to Prabhupada about it, and then Prabhupada said, okay, we won't do it in Boston. And that was in 1976. But in '74, when we purchased the building just with a down payment from the sale of 40 North Beacon Street. I can't remember what the down payment was, but it wasn't big. And
Beacon Street was owned by...
Yeah, we owned the building, but we had a mortgage on it. And anyways, the equity, we had enough equity in that building to put down as a down payment in this building. And myself and one other devotee, because I was a carpenter again, devotee named Nakshatra, we were sent here, and we were the only ones in the building in 1974. We stayed here for months, knocking all down the walls and doing all the carpentry work and preparing the building for moving Radha Gopi Vallabha here. And that was in 1974. I very vividly remember finally this wasn't the temple room at the time. We only knocked down some walls, but it wasn't ready to move the deities. And we had signed a purchase and sale agreement with 40 North Beacon Street that we had to be out of that building by a certain date. And we weren't ready to move the deities here. So the lounge was the temple room. We had to make it a temporary temple room for some time. And because we had to be out of that building by a certain date. I don't remember the date, but it was definitely in 1974. And I remember that we got everything together here for receiving the deities, and so there would be no disruption whatsoever to the deity worship. So in between their morning artik and their lunch offering, I remember all we had was one vehicle. It was a blue Toyota station wagon. And Adi Keshava took Gopi Vallabha and Sumati took Srimati Radharani, and they climbed in the back of the station wagon holding Radha Gopi Vallabha and in the back of the station. I don't remember who was driving, and they drove them here. And then, of course, I had to jump in the car, another car. Somehow somebody brought me here to come and to make everything ready for bringing Radha Gopi Vallabha upstairs into the temporary temple room in the lounge. And then there was no hiccup, nothing. And the deities got their next artik, they got their next offering, and it was, and oftentimes when I hear stories about devotees who want to move the deities and move to another temple, I always remember how much work it took to coordinate Radha Gopi Vallabha's transition from North Beacon Street to here without a hiccup, without the slightest disruption to their worship. And it's the first thing I think of when anybody wants to move a temple is like, are you going to be able to move the deities without a hiccup? Because I know what it took. And and the logistics of it is it takes so many people and so much preparation. It's not like you can just, of course you could bring the deity someplace else for some time, but we didn't do that. We moved them from North Beacon Street to here, directly to their new altar. And then, once we were here, then somehow, I think I was the temple commander for a while. And then a lot of devotees started to join, but it was difficult. I remember financially it was a struggle to meet the mortgage payments. We took out a huge mortgage on this building. It was a long-term mortgage. I think it was $2,500 a month mortgage that we had. And we definitely didn't have the resources for paying that mortgage. How we did it, I don't know. And I was a treasurer for a while too. But I remember everybody was going out and traveling Sankirtan, distributing books. We got 70 Commonwealth Avenue when Ajay was the temple president. He purchased it in 1970, either 5 or 76. Yeah. But there was difficulties with that building. And in fact, when I became the temple president, I had gone to New York for a while. I was the Bhakti director in New York, and then I was brought up here to become the temple president in 79, October 79. And we had had the building 70 Commonwealth Avenue for 3 years by that time, because I just purchased it in 76. And the city was not recognizing it as a religious dormitory. And they were saying that we owed taxes on the building. And they refused to accept. We had lawyers working on everything like that. And finally they passed judgment in 79 that we had to pay all the back taxes. Not only do we have to pay monthly taxes, but back taxes as well. And at that point, when I became the temple president in October of 79, the first order I received from the GBC was to sell 70 Commonwealth Avenue. So
Why didn't they recognize as a...
they said because people are living there, you're not using it for worship. People are living there, and because there are apartments there, and you have people living there, and it doesn't make any difference who they are. They're living there. Although I think we could have fought it, but our lawyers were not able to. And the law firm that we were working with at that time was not really working so much on our behalf. This building was, every floor had 2 apartments. And the space was very restrictive at the time because, especially for public assembly, and especially for communal living at that time. So the first thing we had to do was knock down walls. And of course we had to make sure that we didn't knock down any supporting walls, but the only supporting wall was this wall. That's the only supporting wall. But we had to, I mean, these were sliding doors here, those were sliding doors there, there were walls there, and there was walls here, and there was a wall here in the middle too, and this was one apartment, and that was another apartment, and so that we had to do a lot of knocking down of walls for public assembly, and on this floor, and then on some other floors too, I think we had to knock down walls. On the 3rd floor, we had to knock down walls. And we had to refinish. You know, we did so much work here. I can't. I mean, I can't. I mean, I could probably talk for a week, and how much work was done. I mean, I know every detail. I mean, I used to tell, at one point Adi Keshava and we used to have discussions about this building, and we used to debate who was going to come back as a cockroach in their next life in this building, him or me. Because she was always there in the background telling us what to do. Adi Keshava had to, take out this wall, take out that wall, put up doors here, put up a wall here, do this, that. Take out the elevator. We had to take out the elevator because there was an elevator there, and we had to take out the whole. We made the elevator car into a closet in the basement. That's an elevator car. That closet in the basement, and
Was there any disagreement between
No, Nakshachanemi and I did all the work. We did all the work. And Subhuti came, I think, at one point and started to help too, maybe.
But I mean that between you, let's say if you're discussing, maybe you have one idea and another person.
No, I just followed Nakshachanemi's lead. He was a better carpenter than I was. And it was obvious. And Nakshachanemi was really, really, I mean, I was just but he knew what he was doing. So whatever Nakshachanemi told me, I did it. Yeah. And whatever Adi Keshava told Nakshachanemi and us to do, we just did it. That's all. It was no.
But there was no major disagreement, let's say, to have a temple room upstairs or downstairs or stuff like that?
Things like that didn't exist in those days. That's only modern ISKCON. Modern ISKCON, everybody got an opinion, and you have to spend a year trying to get everybody's opinion and put it all together, and then get votes and everybody pass, and then once you make a decision, some people come. But in those days, no, there was no. At least that's how I experienced it. Adi Keshava said, "Do this." Nakshachanemi said, "This is how we're going to do it." I asked Nakshachanemi how we're going to do it. That's how we did it. At least I don't remember anything. The only thing I remember really, one incident I remember that was, we didn't get into argument, but it was like, because this was just to tell you the kind of neighborhood this was during those days. That Nakshachanemi and I used to sleep in the front hall with a shotgun. okay? And because, anybody could break in. That's the kind of neighborhood it was. And we used to both sleep so soundly that anybody broke in, they'd probably just pick up the shotgun, and the first thing he would do was just eliminate both of us. So I remember getting into, wasn't an argument, but a discussion about whether or not we should sleep with the shotgun. But that's the only thing I can remember. Yes, Back Bay really came up after we came here. It really came up. After we came here, it became like, not only was Back Bay prestigious in Boston, Back Bay was at one point the most prestigious place in the whole country. People, I could tell you a separate story, but it's just a small separate story just to give an indication. I was in 1992, I was on a television show called Street Stories. A television crew came to interview me in the Soviet Union, and we were on television. It was the number 2 rated television show in the country. The producer's there, the director was there, and the associate director from New York, after she did the story on us in the Soviet Union, she wanted to do an article on me because she was a freelance journalist. So she came up from New York to Boston, and to meet me and to interview me. And as soon as she came in the door, she looked at the building and she says, "Wow, I can't believe it. I'm in Commonwealth Avenue in Back Bay." She came upstairs, she went up to the second round, and first she opened the windows, she looked outside, "I can't believe it. I'm in Back Bay." And for her it was like, she was associate producer of CBS, of a major television show. That's the kind of impression people had of Back Bay. We came here, a lot of buildings were for sale. The buildings many of them were empty. Nothing. It came up after we moved in here. Then. Anyways, yeah, and that's all we spent. It was definitely $100 and something thousand for the building. So how affluent could the area be? We bought a building like this for $140,000. I just remember dealing a lot with the neighbors because of the walls. I remember the name of the person who owned the building next door, Nicholas Haddad, who and having to get into so much confrontations with him because his tenants would always come over and complain, and we'd have the police coming in regularly because of the kirtans. We had court cases, and I try to remind the devotees about these things sometimes, not to leave the windows open during the kirtan, but it goes in one ear, out the next. You might want to put that on too. Radha Gopi Vallabha were already installed when I first started coming at the end of '72. Yeah. Yes, Radha Krishna was worshipped exclusively, I think, in '71. I think that's when Prabhupada installed, it was '71, Radha Gopi Vallabha. There's a particular kirtan I'll never forget. And it was in North Beacon Street. And it was probably 1973. I moved into the temple at the end of the summer of '73. And then when I finally shaved up, I was asked to go out and distribute books for a while, but I had a hard time with it. But then I went out on the marathon in December 1973 with several devotees. We went to Springfield. And it was a very austere marathon. For me, it was my first. And although I had been introduced to book distribution before that, this was the time when I was introduced to all day, morning till night, book distribution every day. And we would go out early in the morning and come back late at night, and that was our day of book distribution every day. I remember when I came back to the temple after the marathon, and I remember coming into the temple room and looking at Radha Gopi Vallabha dancing in a kirtan. And it was like the whole spiritual world opened up to me. I mean, I was looking at Radha Gopi Vallabha, and it's almost like they gave me a glimpse of Goloka Vrindavan. That's how I felt. Like my whole body was just like, and I was crying, and it was for me the most profound experience. And I could understand that it was obviously that I think it was during that kirtan probably that had the biggest impression on me about Radha Gopi Vallabha and my relationship with him than any other experience I ever had. Because I felt like they personally were reciprocating. And something that I've always remembered, and I've always felt that that they gave me that glimpse as an encouragement, as an opportunity to show me their eternal pastimes in Goloka Vrindavan. And I feel that they'll personally, at some point, when I'm deserving, they'll be the personalities who will accept me, of course, with Prabhupada's recommendation. But yeah, that was that one kirtan for me. Sort of like it's embedded in my heart that you're their servant. That kirtan. I don't remember who was leading. I don't remember anything. All I just remember is the kirtan. And all I remember is Gopi Vallabha's looking at me, and just like, here's a glimpse. I wasn't even initiated yet.